At Mentor New York, we believe all children are brilliant. And we know that while talent might be equally distributed, opportunity is not. We work to drive equity and close the mentoring gap in New York State by supporting schools, employers, mentoring programs, and youth development organizations with customized consultation and evidence-based best practices to support mentoring relationships for young people wherever they live, learn, work, and play. When I use the term mentoring gap, I'm referring to the alarming statistic that 1 in 3 young people want or need access to a caring adult mentor in their lives, but don't have one, which equates to approximately 500,000 young people across New York State. This disparity dually impacts young people who already face significant barriers to education and quality employment opportunities, with challenges that range from housing insecurity or involvement in the justice system to language barriers or significant trauma. Mentor New York supports a growing network of 2,300 mentoring programs and initiatives across the state, and we see a critical opportunity to continue scaling our impact in the workforce. Our staff are seasoned experts in training adults how to manage with a mentoring mindset, and by affirming young people and prioritizing their psychological safety, we can create work environments that champion outcomes that are enriching and mutually beneficial for employers and their youngest talent. With that said, we are very excited to dive into our panel, and the theme for this discussion is the synergy of youth mentorship and workforce development, and we're joined by 5 incredible professionals today. Carrie Serio, the Director of Professional Learning for Attendance Improvement at the New York City Department of Education, Sabine Pirani, Chief Learning Officer at the Workforce Professionals Training Institute, Freddie Roseman, Senior Director of Digital Technologies at Kind Snacks, Brian Schoiket, Assistant Vice President of Emerging Technology Initiatives at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, and Pedro Suarez, Program Director of Strategic Partnerships at Lyft New York. Our panel will be moderated by my colleague, Joey Gollum, Director of Programs and Partnership Development at Mentor New York. I'll now pass the mic to her to get us started. Thanks again for joining us.
All right. Thank you, Sam. Thank you so much for that introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It really is my privilege to be here to dive into our discussion. Knowing time is of the essence, we're going to jump right in. So I'd love to start with just a quick introduction from each of our panelists. If you can each introduce yourselves, give a brief overview of who you are and the role you currently hold. And let's start with Carrie. Carrie, can you kick us off?
Hi, everyone. My name is Carrie Serio. I work for the New York City Department of Education, as we shared. I'm the Director of Attendance Improvement, and I work really closely on making sure that schools have access to programs that help them improve attendance. So what those barriers are, and one of those great programs are mentoring programs. So happy to be here today. Happy to speak with you all.
Wonderful. And Brian, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Brian Schoiket, as mentioned, I'm currently an assistant vice president at New York City's Economic Development Corporation. For the past 12 years, I've been really working on tech workforce programming. So at EDC specifically, I'm looking at tech workforce within emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, things like that. But prior to, I was very heavily focused on connecting higher education institutions, students, staff to the emerging career paths that were coming out in New York City's tech sector.
Perfect. Thanks, Brian. Freddie.
Hey, everyone. Pleasure to meet everyone today. I'm Freddie Roseman, Senior Director of Digital Technologies at Kind Snacks. We're a division of Mars. I've been with Kind 5 years, supporting all of our digital technologies and from marketing, sales, as well as our IT finance systems. Pleasure to meet everyone today.
Great, thank you. Sabine?
Hello, everyone. My name is Sabine Pirani. Pronouns are she and her. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at the Workforce Professionals Training Institute, WPTI. And what we do is we really work to support those that are in the room, those that are doing and really thinking about career development and career pathways. And so we provide training, consulting, and systems building work to really think about, how do we improve and enhance services? How do we really think about the changing nature of work, and how educational institutions, community-based organizations, employers, government agencies really need to rethink the way that we do things. So really excited to be in this conversation today.
Great. And last but certainly not least, Pedro.
Thanks for having me here today. Pedro Suarez, Program Director, Strategic Partnerships here at LIFT New York. And at LIFT, we invest in parents to break the cycle of poverty through a 2-gen approach. And our model is based on a financial and career coaching program that's delivered to parents of young children. And then we also work very closely in the community with really important partnerships, such as with community colleges and other providers, in supporting the educational persistence and completion of parents of young children and connecting them to career building opportunities.
Terrific. So you can see we have really an incredible group of panelists today who are going to bring so much expertise to this conversation. Carrie, I'd love to kick things off by asking you to expand a little bit with your experience at the Department of Education with this focus on mentoring opportunities. Could you share how these initiatives have fostered student engagement and supported their journey toward college and career readiness?
Absolutely. So as I shared, I work with attendance improvement across the city. And one of the best interventions and one of the most impactful interventions that we have seen to get students more engaged in school is mentoring programs. So in the attendance world, we work with success mentoring programs. That's the name of them. But there are mentoring programs across the system. And we've really seen that young people attend school more often when they have a connection with at least one caring adult in the building, because that really makes them excited to come to school. They know that someone misses them when they're not there. They care about them. And it's it's really something that school staff are already doing, but it's something that we can really use support from folks outside of the school. This takes like a community approach. We need to make sure that we are all working together, whether it be corporations, whether it be community-based organizations, school staff. It's really important that these young people get exposure to different careers and colleges. Not every young person is going to go to college right after high school, and that is fine. We want to make sure that they are prepared for their future. So we want to really, give them the option to connect with folks and connect with people in the workforce in different agencies that care about their future, that can connect with them. And we've really seen that when we prioritize relationships and relationship building, students come to school more often.
That's great. Thanks, Carrie. We've had a terrific partnership with Carrie and with the DOE to create those opportunities where the students can connect with corporations or other agencies. We have great representation here of nonprofit, youth development, corporations to create those pathways and those opportunities for more exposure and really exposing them to all of these different industries. With that in mind, Freddie, from a corporate standpoint, and then Pedro with the not-for-profit, how does mentorship figure into both of your work, either as a formalized program or in more informal ways? Freddie, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah. Definitely from our side, I think we take a two-pronged approach to mentoring. We've just launched a formal mentoring program, which I think is extremely important because it provides the framework between the mentors and the mentees, so that both parties can get the most out of it. But also on the informal side, you think about just going through your day-to-day job. A lot of times the things that you learn on the job, those experiences, you just get by pulling someone over and asking them for advice, right? And I think both are extremely important, especially within the workplace. I personally have benefited a lot from both, and so I'm a big advocate of the formal and informal ways of mentoring.
Great, thank you. We're going to touch more on that, on the implicit stuff too as well, Freddie. Thanks. But Pedro, your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. So again, just want to repeat that LIFT New York is a career and financial coaching program. So while coaching is distinct from mentoring, there is a lot of synergy between the two. At Lift New York, we facilitated career exploration workshops between parents and experienced employees in various industries through a form of group mentoring that is weaved into our Women's Empowerment Council, which is an initiative that serves to build more intentional social connections in service of our members' career goals. But I'll also mention that we work with Masters of Social Work schools and students, and as part of their field placement and internship, we serve approximately 10 or more MSW students per year. And so we're also providing mentoring and really preparing the next generation of social workers to do this very important work with the communities that we serve.
That's great. Yeah. And just for the context of our audience today, too, the work that Mentor New York does when we talk about young people really expands to 24, 25, even a little bit older. That prefrontal cortex is still developing. And so we see that, really the emerging adults, these young employees, all count in this bucket of when we're referring to young people in these experiences. Great. I'm going to turn it now to Brian and Sabine. I want to ask you both about today's largely remote or hybrid work settings, or these other complications or considerations for the evolving complexities of our current workforce landscape, whether it be the tech space, the importance of more diversity in industries. What conditions need to be in place, in your thoughts, to facilitate this idea of implicit mentorship, where more experienced employees can effectively guide newer, younger team members to create more pathways for opportunity? Brian, do you want to start us with that?
Yes, but I'm only going to tackle part of the question because you raised a few points that lead to much larger conversations outside of that. So from the remote and hybrid space, right now at New York City's Economic Development Corporation, I joined 4 months ago, and it is a hybrid environment. But prior to that, I had been working remotely for, call it 4 or 5 years. And then prior to that was hybrid. So coming into a hybrid space from fully remote, I'm actually a huge advocate of mentorship remotely as well. And separately, I am a mentor with CUNY startups. I know this is statewide, so City University of New York. And with that, when we had mentorship only in person, it was a limited set of mentors who were available to the students. When that shifted to remote, all of a sudden we had founders and entrepreneurs from across the country and world who were able to join and help these students as well. So from programs that I've seen, and a lot of these certainly existed before, but COVID helped a lot of these programs and platforms really step up their game. Were things like at EDC, we use a program called Lattice. My last company, recruiter.com, we used 15.5, but these are ways to have asynchronous check-ins. And so having those asynchronous check-ins followed by one-on-ones live over Zoom was a great way to really pair the two together. So you could get feedback from somebody in the interim. You could then respond asynchronously to help flesh out what their feedback may have been. And then for the in-person, that's when you can really dive in with an understanding of where they're feeling most challenged. Or I guess even you could see opportunities for growth. So communication, remote, hybrid, I think is critical to it, but also in some cases a lot easier. When we're talking about younger people, digital method of communication versus in-person can be more approachable sometimes. It is very much up to both parties, but especially the mentor to make sure that communication exists. The check-ins piece I mentioned, and then the final piece I'll say is measurement. So in a mentor-mentee relationship, there's some goal that you're working toward, right? And those goals can certainly shift over time. But I think with the asynchronous approach and with these software platforms, you have ways that you can kind of chart progress along the way, which we might take for granted with an in-person conversation. So I honestly think remote and hybrid kind of help to supplement what's so great about in-person mentorship.
That's great, Brian. Thank you for that. And yeah, and then Sabine, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. I just want to add, Brian, when we were talking before too, it's interesting to think about these platforms that can help facilitate that. But there is a little bit of, has to be intention and ownership from the side of the employers to set that up, right? And to facilitate that or give incentives or talk to the staff about what that is. Sabine, I don't know if you want to talk on that at all. And then Brian, if you want to circle back, I don't know if you have additional thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah, I think communication is very key. And I think these platforms out there can really help that. A couple of tools that we use here at WPTI are Slack and Asana. And I think that's really helped us to have that communication because we do work mostly remotely. And we've brought on fully remote interns the past three summers from the Tisch Summer Fellows Program at Tufts. And so I think one of the key pieces is also, in addition to communication, is onboarding. And what does that onboarding process look like? Do they have the opportunity to meet multiple people? At our organization, they meet with everyone. They have, we're small. They have one-on-ones with everyone within their first 2 weeks of coming on to the organization. And the feedback that we've gotten from each of our interns, and they've ranged from like just finishing their freshman year of college to their, being in a master's program, they have all said that those connections that they made in those first 2 weeks, really allowed them then the opportunity. They felt comfortable going to our CEO and asking her questions. They felt comfortable reaching out to other team members. And so I think that's really important when we're thinking about, not just the formal mentoring, but how do you really think about, that supportive environment for someone that's coming in new. And I will say, I think one of the things that I've heard time and time again from young people, I just read it in a SHRM article also, was around, young people are seeking guidance and support. Like that's one of the main things that they're looking for, whether it's in the workplace, or in a program where they're learning about work and the workplace. But it's, they want that guidance and support to make informed decisions. And so how do we, help them make those connections? The other thing that we do at WPTI to really kind of build those relationships, right? Because we're hearing that, right? Carrie, you're just talking about, the importance of those relationships. And so one of the things that we do with interns, new staff, is to do we do the DISC workplace behaviors profile. And then we really talk about what that means for our team culture, how we work together, what are the motivators and frustrations of each kind of person. And we talk about that. And so, even if they are not a full-time staff member, they're participating in this experience. And we're really being intentional about building in those opportunities for that relationship building.
Thanks, Sabine. And actually in our workshop after the panel, we're going to talk more about tools like DISC and things like that. So I appreciate that. Brian, did you want to circle back to any of those thoughts?
Yeah, one quick one, just because you mentioned the incentives piece. So it's not, I would love for people to be more self-motivated in this, but the use of these platforms, and especially for remotely, it's tied to bonuses in some cases. So you're using that to get the sense of sentiment also, but from a managerial perspective, you can see, are you checking in with the people who report to you? You can use that as a measurement tool. And then for performance, there is a track record over the course of the quarter that shows this is how the person has evolved, developed. And this is looking at mentorship specifically in the managerial setting. But that, as far as the incentive piece goes, again, would love for people to be more self-motivated when it comes to mentorship, but a corporate incentive there. Sabine, you mentioned something on the comfort aspect, which raised a really great point, which is like through Zoom, I see Barbara, I'm going to call you out from the audience, but I see your background and I see bookshelves, and like that opens a conversation that gives a level of comfort to the person I'm speaking with. Whereas to say, all right, let's go into this very sterile conference room, creates a very different dynamic where you're sitting across the table versus you're in a space of comfort, the other person's in a space of comfort. There's more intimacy to it. The last piece, Slack, Asana, you mentioned, Slack, like that's super helpful because with anyone, they say, hey, do you have a minute? I have a question. Yes, great. Now you're virtual in a conference room already. Like the time to setting up that conversation has shrunk dramatically with a communication tool like Slack, Teams, Asana.
Yeah, that's terrific. Yeah. there's so much there. I want to keep going on all of that. I'm going to think, though, specifically this point about how we can kind of be creative about incentives. With part of the workshop too, we're going to delve into what this, the employer benefits to mentorship and what that looks like. And we think a lot about employee engagement when they want sort of outlets to connect to the community and do other things that might strengthen their skills, but also, give back or connect to young people. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of one-off experiences, because we facilitate those a lot at Mentor New York. Freddie, we did that at Kind. We had career days. Lyft, I know, Pedro, you do a lot of like networking cohorts or learning events. And Carrie, you help facilitate that from the young people from the DOE perspective. So what do you see as the impact of these initiatives in broadening young people or emerging professionals' perspectives on various industries and roles? It enlarges their networks, they're honing soft skills, maybe they're practicing interviewing or networking skills. I'm curious to hear from all of you from either the employer standpoint or for the participants, the young people or emerging adults and professionals, what that looks like. So Carrie, do you want to start us with that?
Yeah, I just think it's so important that we, even if it is like those I know Kind did one with some of our high schools, I believe in Brooklyn South, or Brooklyn North, sorry. They did an event and a day like that. I just think it's so important that we are exposing our young people to opportunities that they might not see all the time. Like, I know that, like, I didn't even know my job existed when I was in high school. Like, who would have known that like this was a job that I could have, right? And so I think that, they hear about typical like careers and jobs and different things, but every young person has a different area of expertise. Every young person has a different interest, right? And so if we can connect with opportunities for them to get exposure to different things they can do, we see it with after school programs, right? Like, we're offering opportunities for them, like whether it be cartoon design or things like that. Like, I've seen kids come to school more regularly because they are so interested in attending that program, and that's what they want to do for the future. And so they figured out how to integrate that into their education, right? And so if we can connect them to thinking outside the box when it comes to what their career or their future will be, I think we're going to get a lot of kids back engaged, like back into school. Since COVID, as I'm sure that absenteeism has risen across the nation. It's not just here in New York City. It's not just New York State, but it was a huge thing that happened to our children, to our communities. And so we are in a different workforce after COVID, right? Like, we are in a different place, and we can't just keep offering our kids the same opportunities and the same career exposure post-COVID, because we're in a different place. There's not going back. We're not going back to those opportunities. And so if we can partner with corporations intentionally, and we can really meet the kids where they're at, but also project where they need to be going or where they could be going, it's going to be huge on like engagement.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, Freddie, do you want to tack on to that with your experience from the employer side?
Sure. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with Kerry. I think I love these events. I think about I think about exposure, even in my own career. I think about how I was exposed to software development at a very, very young age, and I think the goal of what we're trying to do with these programs is expose young people to the art of the possible as early as possible, right? And so I think it's a huge benefit to just show them. This is what's possible. Here's potentially how you get there, and then allow them to move on that and go back and think about it from a mentorship perspective. But also there is a benefit as well to the company, right? I looked at my fellow team members after that event, and there was definitely an impact it was a bi-directional impact as well, right? And that we were able to understand a little bit more about the youth mindset and where their head is at, right? And then it allows us to tailor some of our experiences so we can resonate a little bit more with them. So I love these events, and I think it's extremely impactful both ways.
Yes, thank you. And, Carrie, to your point too, and with Freddie, with our experience, we were specifically working with the IT department at Kind for these initiatives. So the idea that, we would highlight roles within the company that the students might not even think of, was really a big focus of that. Pedro, yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on these one-off opportunities and events.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it starts with public speaking, right? Getting comfortable telling your story. And I remember my first exposure to that was a college application essay, right? Being asked to tell your story. It's like, well, what is that? And so part of these engagement events and building social connections here at Lyft, what's one of the things that's really important to us is what we call elevating member voice or constituent voice. And like, how do you coach people on doing that and creating opportunities for individuals to craft their own voice and be able to tell their story? That's really the first step of building social connections. And we've talked about things like elevator pitch, the interview process. All of that starts with that internal dialogue and getting comfortable with public speaking. And so that exposure through the events that we do and building those social connections, I think provides folks with the ability to do that, but also not just exposure to different perspectives, but also exposure to similar experiences, right? The idea of not being alone and just knowing that other folks are dealing with certain challenges or developing certain skills as well really builds this sort of a cohort mentality and a support system.
Yeah, Pedro, I really appreciate that. Both the soft skills that we can apply directly to the workforce setting or going, developing your career, but then also the interpersonal skills. And I think, Freddie, to your point too about the employer experience, just those interpersonal skills that play into all of our roles in life, right? And how we can exercise that and just creating opportunities for relationship and connection really develops those skills for everybody, which is beneficial. We are running short on time. I want to have Brian and Sabine. I have another question for you, and then really open it up for anyone else in the panel if you have thoughts or last thoughts on any of these topics we've covered. But I'm curious, Brian and Sabine, from your experience, as we look towards the future, are there any emerging trends or innovations that you've seen that have the potential to kind of reshape the landscape of what workforce mentorship looks like? I know, Brian, you've talked about some of these technical tools, Sabine, some of the focus on different trainings or approaches we should be taking with onboarding and things like that. Is there anything else in your experience that you hope to see or that we are seeing as emerging trends that we should be thinking about? Sabine, do you want to take it first?
Sure. I think just one quick thing to add around this is around the role of that mentorship can play around like workplace stress and mental health. And that's something, I think we're all seeing the stats around, young people and the impact of the past few years. And so I think that there is so much power that mentoring can have in also supporting, how do we navigate workplace stress? How do we just kind of navigate different conversations, with our supervisors, with colleagues? And I think that can also help with the stigma around, mental health issues and, making it something that we can talk about at work, and it is a place where we spend so many hours. And so how do we support, not just young people, but each other in our spaces as well. And so I think that's something that I'm seeing talked about more and more is around how mentoring can really, and it's just going back to those relationships, how do we, whether it's in person, whether it's virtual live, or whether it's through an asynchronous platform, how do we really build that engagement and support? Because again, that's what we're seeing, young people want, and we're seeing the results from that.
Yeah, thank you. And, one of the things that we do, and we'll touch more on the workshop, but this idea, whether it's in the onboarding or just the general supports and training we're giving, how do we train both the supervisor with that mentor mindset, but then also the young professional in how to navigate those things. And then when you have that training where they can have some shared language on that or shared protocol on that, it helps them navigate those things with ease and knowing that they have the same sort of understanding and foundational support from both the supervisor standpoint and the professional. So yeah, I appreciate that, Sabine. Brian, do you want to add some thoughts?
I will add them, but they will not be nearly as helpful. I think back to the conversation that you and I had, Joey, when we were first talking about this panel. And as you were describing how Mentor New York thinks about mentorship, I was like, isn't that just being like a good human. And so Sabine, for everything you mentioned, and when Sam had sent the questions over, the note that I had for it was just continue to treat people like people. And so whatever the platform is, like, that doesn't, I know we're talking about emerging trends, innovations, but like, meet each other where you are, the mentor, the mentee. There are tools for it, however that it, like, if it's going to be in person, fine, there are coffee shops. If it's going to be online, like, there are platforms. But that's it. So I view it as less of an emerging trend, and I guess more as the reminder of like, this is what makes a mentorship or a management relationship successful, is just treating people like people, and then you can kind of figure out how to facilitate that later.
Thank you. I that's such a beautiful note, towards the end of our conversation. Again, I want to open it up to Pedro, Carrie, Freddie, Sabine, if any of you have any follow-up thoughts. I think to this point that Brian's making about the way that we treat each other in the workplace and setting up those conditions, mentorship is, it takes that and then even a step further to say, when we start to employ some of those characteristics and those intentions, right? And then someone actually identifies you as a mentor, it means because you've embodied those things, and then you've been able to push them and develop them and guide them in a way that, these other relationships in your life haven't. So I think we start with those fundamental skills and approaches and really being good supervisors and creating safe and supportive learning environments, work environments, and then how it goes above and beyond. So Pedro, I see your hand. Yeah, if you want to add some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I do believe that a lot of people entering the workplace and in the workplace today, but particularly younger professionals, are expecting some level of mentorship as part of their experience with employers, regardless of industry. And so I know personally that building strong social connections in the workplace has been critical to my own career growth. And so I think it is important that employers intentionally create structures and practices to support people at all levels in their organization with mentoring opportunities. And where I currently work, Lyft New York, has been really intentional about making sure that there are multiple opportunities to connect with folks at all levels of the organization. And that's been really helpful in terms of collaboration, sharing ideas, best practices. And so really creating those opportunities, I think is not just important for the development of individuals, but the health of the organization overall.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I have not been able to keep up with the chat because I, try to stay so focused on the conversation, but I see there's wonderful things happening in the chat. I think all of our panelists have shared their contact information. If you want to reach out and circle back, they're sharing some additional thoughts. So I hope that this is just the beginning of this conversation. I really cannot thank our panelists enough for their time, their expertise, their commitment to this work, being leaders in this space. Like I said, I hope this is only the beginning of our partnership with each of you, but really everyone on this call, that we can engage and continue to create these mentoring cultures in the workplace and creating these opening of doors and opportunities for our young people to enter the workplace with the kind of support and conditions that they deserve.